All right, my dear. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amrit.
Such a pleasure to be here.
We're giggling because this is our 12th take of this. We had a few technical.
She's being modest. It's actually our 22nd. No,
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Yes, you're gonna get us straight up giddy. But on the bright side, he's really good at telling his story. This is the point.
Well, now I got pressure to tell it well.
Oh no! They don't know what it started off as. This is the least decorum. I love it. I love it. Oh my goodness. Welcome to Quit Happens, everyone. We're just going to laugh for 25 minutes. My dear new friend, who now we have forged through the fire of technology together. We had never met before, but Amrit and I are both in the AFES community, and I saw that he has a podcast that I will let him tell you all about. But what he talks about on his podcast led me to know I was sure there were some quits behind the scenes. Sure enough, we chatted. He did not disappoint. There were plenty of really different quits, and he phrases things as quits, which I love. So I'm going to have him tell you all about them. We are going to start by going back to a time. And by the way, how long ago was this that you were at your psychologist's office?
2013. So 6 years now.
Okay.
Maybe a bit longer. 2000. That doesn't seem to feel right. Maybe 6 or 7 years now.
Okay. And so what happened with that psychologist that led to this first quit you want to tell us about?
So basically I'm sitting in the psychologist's office and I've basically just been diagnosed with depression. And it was a deep moment for me personally, just because I'd been going through this uneasiness, I guess you could probably call it, for like longer than I knew. It was just the way that I was for the most part. And she diagnosed me with depression, and there's kind of this breath of fresh air that came with that diagnosis. And I know for most people a diagnosis is usually quite horrifying like that, but for me it was like, right, okay, because some part of me deep inside, I guess, always knew that something was wrong, but then on the other hand, there's I didn't know that there was any other way to be than the way that I was being for the large part. And I think my greatest symptom was just how agitated I was with life, really. And that was the significance of, my depression, is that I really wasn't comfortable. And the root cause of all of that, which we established in that, sitting, was basically I lacked honesty in a really big way. Really big way. And looking back and gathering some self-awareness as to, like where that started on the journey. For me, it started really early on. And I'm not sure how much you know about Asian cultures, but, it's a big part of the culture to make sure you put your best foot forward at all given times. You see that in everything in the culture, really. Even just that, like Asian kids have so much pressure to become either a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or a failure. There's just that, that idea that, you've really got to become someone, and if you're not, then it's a disappointment. And so for the most part, you've really got to put your best foot forward, is really the best way that I can put it. And that showed up on the big scale. I obviously became an engineer, but then it shows up in little things as well. You'd be like, Amrit, where are you? You're 15 minutes late, and I'd say, I'm only 5 minutes away, don't stress. I'd placate you on hand at the time for sure, but I'd still be another 20 minutes away. And so that doesn't sound like too much dishonesty, but white lies are dishonest, right, at the end of the day. And so it was a thing that was congruent across, just the way that I was being. And I honestly didn't know any other way to be. That was just how I was functioning in the world up until that point. And we had this drop-in where she made it quite clear that, that was a choice that I made every single time that, I decided to communicate. And I found that completely riveted me, because I just thought that was how everybody was, I didn't know that was a choice that I was making to be dishonest. I just thought that, everybody was putting their best foot forward to placate each other, to interact in the most what seemed to be the most frictionless way possible. And so that was a huge moment for me. Yeah, it was like, I still, even now, like thinking about getting goosebumps. But yeah, so that was massive. And, the couple of things she said, right after was, you're going to be okay in about a month or two. And I was like, some part of me, I'm not a violent person, but some part of me was really like aggravated by when she said that, because I'd been living this way for however long, and all of a sudden she had the remedy. And I almost felt like she discounted what I'd gone through by just saying, oh, you'll be sweet, in about a month. And I was like, are you serious? But she was, for the most part, right. And so what she basically got me to do was, get really clear and sit down and said, look, you're just going to have to adopt honesty. You're going to have to accept honesty into your life. And you can look at it as accepting honesty. But for me at the time, it was quitting dishonesty and quitting lying. And it sounds really easy. But as you can imagine, something that you've been so ingrained with for so long, it's a pattern of behavior, and everything we do are, influenced by the patterns that we invest in. It was something that was really difficult to shed. So the exercise we went through, basically she helped me write down and make a vow to myself that as of this point in this time, I commit to honesty for myself. And even at the time, I remember that being like a really, like I was an adolescent, so I was like, is this really what we're doing? Like, is this the exercise? But the reality of it was, I realized in that moment, this only goes as deep as I go with myself. So I made it a point to sort of, sear this into my mind. And then I'd love to say that, when I quit, like everything quit cold turkey and everything was sweet, but that's never how it happens. Obviously, it's like I said, patterns of behavior. There's moments where you drop in and, you end up, the same pattern kicks in. Like I happen to lie again. And but the beauty of it was that I felt the rub inside, I felt that all, and there's this image of like the vow that I made in my head sort of like flashed, and I was like, okay. And you obviously do that 5 or 6 times accidentally or intentionally, either way. But it's like rubbing the cat the wrong way. After a while, it sort of and corrects you to rub it the right way. And then you start to fall into the pattern that you want.
Oh, that's really powerful. So many things in there. Like you just said, the last thing, step 1, recognize the problem. Because if you don't, like you said, you'd been living in a place where that just was normal to you. You'd been doing it, you'd been making those decisions to be, we'll say dishonest, even in the little small ways, like you said. And there probably was a little bit feeling that you just didn't stop and recognize because it just happened so often, and you didn't have the self-awareness to tune into it.
Yeah, and I think, we're both AFESs, so we both understand the idea of Satori and Kensho. And so, you have these moments where you go through like supreme bliss or like real tough challenges. And for me, it came in like that awareness, it's amazing. Like we talk a lot about awareness, and a lot of the work that I do now with the Inspired Evolution is around, emotional intelligence and mental awareness. Obviously because of this past. But at the crux of it, like that awareness came from like a real tough, like Kensho experience, like all the lies that I had built up, basically, my friends and family and all my circle all of a sudden could see through them. And that was the impetus for me to go, oh my God, like everything like I had constructed in my mental whatever just came crumbling down. And just the shame and the guilt and everything that was on the other side of it, I was like exposed to that, not just in their eyes, but for the first time, actually, truthfully in my own eyes. And I think that was the biggest thing for me as well. Was like, on some hand, like there is all the dishonesty with all the other people that came along the way, but I'm still finding it hard to forgive myself for how dishonest I was with myself.
Is that a continuing struggle, or is that something you've been working with in the past few years?
So the biggest tool that came to me out of all of this was meditation. So when I left the psychologist's office, actually, and this is bleeding into another story that I tell all the time. She left me. She diagnosed me with a whole bunch of antidepressants, and on the other hand, she gave me this breathing mindfulness technique. And as you can imagine, at the time, I looked at this breathing technique and I looked at her and I was like, breathing, like, are you serious? Like breathing, this thing I do every day anyway, like Yeah, thanks, mate. And I went and fulfilled the prescription. And I took the prescription, took my first pill, and I was off my head. I cleaned my house. I did so much work. I got so much shit done. It was incredible. It was fascinating. And I had a brilliant time. Now, as soon as I started coming down 4 to 5 hours later, I was like, oh, I'm coming down. And I had this deep realization that this is going to be a lifelong journey of zoom, 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 zoom. And I wasn't ready for that. And no part of me was like, I was into health. I was going to the gym a lot, and I was like, this doesn't seem like a healthy way to be. Um, so I stopped taking them, even though I was still in that sort of situation. I was kind of hoping that just the awareness of where I was at, I didn't know which way to go really. Um, but something happened where I was back at university, and university used to provide me with a lot of anxiety. So I was back at university walking down a hallway, and I could actually, for the first time, feel the compression in my chest. And I had, by some grace, on the back of my phone, I'd put the 5-step breathing, like I'd written it down on a post-it, and I'd put it in the back cover. And I pulled my phone out just because I was stressed. I didn't know what was going on. And I looked, and somehow there, by some divine miracle, actually, was the 5-step breathing exercise. And I looked at it, and I was like, I've got nothing to lose in this moment. I was just like desperate. So I started breathing, and I was like, and I went through it, and I could not believe the state change that occurred. I could not, like, it completely blew me away. And that's where mindfulness first came into my life. And from there, I started working deeper and deeper with mindfulness for about 12 months. And then growing up Indian, my father had always been a meditator. My mother had always been a meditator. But it was something that seemed far off and esoteric to me. And then mindfulness really opened the gateway to meditation. And I've been meditating ever since. So I kind of do believe with meditation in some regards that you don't really shed your demons, you learn to live above them through self-awareness. And so now being a meditator, like there are like, yeah, it's so much self-awareness comes with that, yeah, look, it's not something that is a reoccurring pattern anymore. I think once you shift your values and you make a commitment, I think cultivation is the game for everything. If you cultivate honesty, you consistently show up more and more honest. If you cultivate dishonesty, you show up more and more dishonest. It's just whichever seed you water, that is what will grow. So spending more and more time and consciously what you grow, consciously things grow faster as well.
Absolutely. I think what happened somewhere in your journey is that there was a quit behind the quit. And tell me if I'm right here. Because for you to be able to quit lying, you had to quit the thought that you had to placate everyone all the time, that you had to live by society and by this, like you said, the way you were raised, where external validation or the way things appear to society was of paramount importance.
It's interesting that you're dissecting it to that, because on some level that is definitely there was definitely like subliminal quits within that massive overarching quit. That was definitely one of them. I even had to quit some friendships. Like there was lots of other little quits lying underneath that big quit. Yeah, so there's definitely aspects to that. I would love to sort of say that yes, like I was consciously aware that there was societal expectations, but that leads into a quit that sort of came further down the track. So like that,
Fair enough.
still working through that one. And even now, like the one about society and its expectations, that's something that we've been coaching people through as part of the Inspired Evolution as well, and I'm still going through that actively myself as well.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. And yes, I do enjoy dissecting the quits. That is that is my mental
the
the only thing I dissect is quit.
inception of quits.
Yeah. Because that's the thing is people say like, oh, I'm having a really hard time quitting this thing. And I'm like, well, there's probably, like you said, 3 or 4 mini quits that you may have to make before you can quit that thing.
Yeah.
Or you won't have to make them separately, but that's just why your other quit will take longer, because you will be, with whether or not you know it, quitting those 3 or 4 other things. But it's
Yeah.
just easier if you can shed those layers and identify like, oh man, it's so much easier to tell people my honest truth if I'm not concerned that I'm letting down my family, or if I'm not concerned about how they're judging me, or how society is ranking me and my importance, or what have you. So I imagine that, like you said, it all comes full circle at some point, especially
Yeah. As
as you
you
get more mindful.
yeah, and as you're talking to me about that, I think the impetus in like all of that was for me, my own mental health and well-being. And so also like being aware that trying to quit too many things at once was definitely not an option for me. Like that, I think those were all, like I said, subliminal, subsidiary to what I was aiming to quit at the time. And I think that was just like all the little quits were like a healthy byproduct of like, because your motivation is only so much, right? So like trying to debunk dishonesty, whilst also like, you know, giving the shoulder to society's expectations may have been like too much for me or my system to handle at the time as well. So just being mindful of, you know, what your capacity is and what it is that your motivation is, and sort of allowing that to sort of, you know, take you where you need to go.
I think you just brought up a huge point for anybody. We're recording this in January of the new year, and people make these resolutions, and sometimes things, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head. Is what is your motivation? Like, if your motivation is to have peace of mind in yourself, as opposed to, okay, my motivation is to just keep this one person in my life that I have been lying to happy, I think you're going to have vastly different outcomes and different ease of journey, right? It's like, is that what you experienced?
Absolutely, you know, and it sounds like it's all rosy, but you know, it definitely is. You know, like as soon as you adopt honesty, like it just the amount of mental pressure. And this is a double-edged sword, but excuse my humor. I've got a weird, wacky sense of humor, but like I can't remember anything anymore. Like long-term memory is completely shot, because when I was dishonest, I had to remember what I told Lynn Marie about what I did last Wednesday, and what I told my girlfriend I did last Wednesday, and what I told my dad I did last Wednesday. Because then there would have been 3 different versions of events depending on what I think they wanted to hear from me, you know? And now it's just, this is what I was doing last Wednesday. So, and then now it's like, you ask me, what did you do last Wednesday? And it's like, oh, really got to remember, like, okay, what's my phone calendar, and like, what was I actually doing? You know, I just tell you that. And so like, it's so liberating, the amount of mental load that you free up to actually be creative and do all the other things that you need to do in life, which are essential for you to actually live a healthy, life filled with well-being. But the caveat is, like, you end up with a terrible memory if you're an honest person. So
everything has its two sides, but I think that the benefits are outweighing that negative in this one.
I believe so.
So you develop these new mindful techniques, and I'm guessing that this leads into your next big quit that you and I had chatted about before we started recording.
Yeah, so that has definitely bled into you know, becoming more and more mindful, has led down a very vast journey, and like I said, like, now the work that I do for the most part is I'm a mindfulness and meditation coach, consultant, and I do that for individuals, but mostly organizations now. It started off doing it for construction companies, which was a pretty interesting environment to bring meditation and mindfulness to, and I'm still doing that, and I absolutely love it. It's so rewarding. But yeah, so that's kind of been, you know, the journey of self-awareness, because once something gives you so much, it's hard not to continuously share that. You know, I'm sure you've had some major quits in your life that have completely changed your life, and you're just like, quits, you know, and that's why you've got this podcast, and it's just like, quits have cup up so much that you're giving that energy on. So it's much the same for mindfulness for me. So yeah, the awareness journey has, you know, taken me far and wide, and, you know, I've traveled quite a bit. And this interesting thing happened when I was traveling. 2 years ago, I was sitting in Costa Rica with my girlfriend, and everybody has San Marcos in Guatemala. It is amazing.
Can you start with sitting in Costa Rica, because the line just cut out for a second?
Okay. If anybody has the opportunity to go to this place called San Marcos in Guatemala, it is absolutely amazing. It's a really spiritual place for those that are for the locals, and we just had this really amazing experience. Like, we were sitting, it was a night of the full moon, a couple of days before the new year, and I've never seen so many shooting stars in one night. I don't think I've seen that many shooting stars all together in my life as I had seen in this one night. And so we're just sort of sitting there and just like taking in the beauty of this beautiful Lake Atilan. And I've never been one, it's interesting you were mentioning New Year's resolutions. I've never been one to make New Year's resolutions. It just wasn't really something for me. I think because I've seen so many people flake all the time around them, it just seemed like a deteriorative thing to your mindset to like commit and then fall back. And so on that journey, I was sitting there and I remember turning around to her and I said, you know, I'm actually going to make a commitment this year to do more of what I love. And she was like, "Oh, that's that's cool. You're making a New Year's resolution." I was like, "No, but like, yes." But that was, it was kind of in that moment, just the inspiration sort of came in to do more of what I love. And I came home, and this really interesting thing started happening, and it was just, I don't know, the energy of that place. But when I came home, I'm sitting there with I go back to work in my construction industry. In construction, we're larrikins. We get lots done, but we're also like larrikins as well. It's just part of the construction culture. And at the end of work, everybody will go out for a beer frequently. And I remember coming back from this trip. We'd been through Africa and all these other places, South America, and people are now drinking alcohol. And to me, it, like, my mental like acuity was like, oh, they're smoking a cigarette. It was a really strange shift, and I didn't, like, not that people that smoke cigarettes are bad, people that drink alcohol are bad, but just watching that, like, because I've always been inspired by health, like even the Inspired Evolution podcast, it's about helping people come onto their purpose, find their purpose in life, why they're really here. But it's driven by health, because I believe the healthiest version of you is the version of you that's on purpose, right? Living your gifts, vibrant vitality. And so on that journey, it was this really interesting moment where I started watching all these people drinking, and I couldn't bring myself to have a beer. Because I was like, I know I don't smoke because smoking's unhealthy, right? And we all know the stats and all the stories behind that. So why would I subject myself to smoking? Why would I subject myself to that beer? But it was weird because it was something that I was so actively engaged in previously. So somehow some level of awareness inside me just sort of clicked at some point. I wish I could tell you, like, yes, this is distinctly what happened, but I came back from this trip and I just couldn't really drink. And the more I watched people drinking, the more this rub inside me was like, smoking a cigarette. And it was hard because the culture that I was in, my work environment, and especially the person that I had built myself to be in this, like, I was like, if we were drinking, I was the one going the hardest, and I didn't have an issue with alcohol in that, like, it was like, oh yeah, I'm drinking every other night, and it was like I was addicted to it. For me, it was like I wasn't drinking that frequently. It was like I would drink once a month, but because I would like abstain from drinking for the whole month, when I did drink, it was like, all right, the floodgates have finally opened, the dam wall is down, let the water run, and so I would literally like drink one, which would turn into six, which would turn into half a carton of beers, and then that would be me, absolutely wasted, and all the stories that come with that, which I think a lot of you have had at least one of those friends. And so yeah, I was going through that, maybe, yeah, like at least half a dozen to a dozen times a year. I would go through these binge drinking episodes, where I'd just be completely wasted, and the next day I'd go through the process of like reconstituting myself. The hangovers were terrible. And so I went through this process of going and just seeing people quit seeing people drinking, which just somehow had kept enforcing that, I wasn't going to drink, because I could just feel like this unhealthiness to it. And I stopped drinking, and that's been 2 years now. And quitting alcohol, yeah, it's going to sound very cliche when I say this, but it completely changed my life. In so many ways that I can't even, like, I'm gonna share the story with you, but it's gonna sound ridiculous. But so this is how it goes. Thank you for listening, by the way. This is a story time.
Yeah.
But basically, I gave up alcohol and I came back. And what was the interesting thing that was happening through this year was my girlfriend continued to travel on around the world for the next 12 months. She was on what would most likely be called a yantra, which is she was finding herself through travel. And I'm at home by myself. So all of a sudden, I've given up alcohol, just through not even a conscious decision, but just like an awareness thing. And I'm at home, and I had this clear moment where I was watching a Tony Robbins clip on YouTube, and I had this aha moment, like as you do when you watch Tony Robbins, and it was like boom. And so I turn around to the couch, and my girlfriend's not there, and I'm like, oh, surely other people feel the same way when they have these aha moments. They have someone they want to share it with. So I stopped, and I had a few things cascade into a moment, and I basically got onto Facebook, created a group, called it Mandala Moments, and invited 5 of the most inspiring people in my life that would inspire me, right, to come to my house and gather every alternate Friday, so every fortnight. I just created this group so that we could watch something or read something, and we could discuss and share and just have this gathering. And because for me, Friday night drinks was one of my favorite social things to do. And so what I realized was alcohol is actually a social lubricant. And I was still an extrovert. I'm still social, but I'm not getting Friday night drinks because I don't want to be around that culture anymore. And so I started brewing chai for this Mandala Moments thing that I started hosting. And I did that every fortnight. And it's still going on now. The next one's this Friday. And so that basically has grown, from me having Mandala Moments in my house, where a community of 5 people that were my most inspirational people, you're the average of the 5 people you spend your time with, is kind of what was ruminating in the back of my head at the time as well, grew into a community of, there's 200 people in that community now that basically, out of them, any 20 to 25 people come together every alternate Friday. And now people have set up their own Mandala Moments, in and around Victoria. So the people are hosting their own events. And that gave birth out of that. We were having these really deep conversations, because there was no alcohol involved. People were coming really consciously to connect and build community over chai. And we started talking about things like deep philosophy, where you're at, spirituality, what was coming up, like conversations like you and I are having now, like what did you have to let go in your past to become who you are today? And all these sort of things started coming up, and people were like, dude, you should do a podcast. And I was like, no. They're like, you should podcast these conversations. And I was like, no, because we only really go super deep because nobody's listening, right? People feel safe in this space. And they're like, yeah, but some of these conversations really are having an impact on like everybody's lives, and they're changing their lives. We should really dive deep into this. And you could share this energy further through a podcast. And I was like, no, really not for me. And then a mentor appeared who's like, I really want to help you have a podcast. And all my friends like, do a podcast. And I realized I'm in the way. So I kind of let myself go and then ended up with a podcast. Now, had I not given up alcohol, right? Had I not taken that step to, just let go of that and just succumb to the energy of like, but it's what everybody's doing and just keep drinking. I would never have created Mandala Moments, and I never would have created from there the podcast, and created is an interesting word because everything at all times is co-created. So it's not just me that created all of this. It's co-created by everyone. But that, like having Inspired Evolution, the podcast, consistently podcasting people and interviewing them to see, the Inspired Evolution is interviewing inspiring people that are living the life of an entrepreneur or a creative, fundamentally because I saw people living their lives of entrepreneurs and creatives, and they inspired me. But when I went to work, my CEO, my regional director, they didn't inspire me. They weren't honest, first of all. And there was all these other things that came with it, the lack of integrity that, like I had so deeply instilled in myself. They weren't congruent to that, and so that was a challenge for me to be in and around that. But I kind of held the energy for a while that, I was going to be the change in the industry or in my company that, the future generations carry the change, basically. But it got to the point through podcasting, I realized actually I'm probably in the wrong environment for me, because there are all these people that inspire me, and I'm consistently connecting with them through the podcast. And connecting with these people through the podcast, whether I liked it or not, helped me change my career. I basically ended up quitting my job. And so quitting alcohol led me to quit my job, which now has me living, in even more congruence. We go back to honesty. I'm living like the life of the Inspired Evolution, and it's me being as vulnerable as possible to share with you the ups and the downs of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, to be a creative, to walk out on your own path and just live life, the way that you feel like, you're here to live it. And it's a rocky up and down road for sure, with absolute highs and some really, deep lows, which you kind of navigate and battle through. But that's the journey, and that's the process. And so in that, I had to quit my job, and it was fascinating because I'll share that quit with you as well, just while I'm on a roll.
I love this.
Is that, this is the engineer in me, right? So I thought now that I've done a podcast, my friends had convinced me to do this. This could be a useful tool, right? Because after I started understanding what it's all about, I was like, maybe I can interview 200, 300 people, and over 2 to 3 years or 5 years, I will have garnished enough insight and wisdom from these entrepreneurs and these creatives to basically pull out a framework and a formula that I can then basically de-engineer all the creativity and entrepreneurialism from everybody else, and then reconstitute that and re-engineer that into my life, and build it in and be that person. And the fascinating thing was I didn't even last 15 episodes. Yeah. So after about 15 episodes, it became really clear that everybody that was an entrepreneur or a creative had completely gone about it in their own unique way. Right. So there was no formula for being a creative or an entrepreneur. And so that's like the challenge of the Inspired Evolution, is trying to help people find their creativity and what it is that is their gift and how can they can walk into that. But it's got no formula to do that. So that's why hence all the stories, so you can learn from everybody's story. But there were some things that were really consistent through the stories, and they weren't engineering skill-based things. It was like, what is your relationship with the unknown like?
Yes, that's huge.
How much can you trust, And so all these really gooey things, which are really heart-centered, really and they're where all your fears reside, And I think this is why a lot of people just, we talked about social expectations before. So I had to quit the social expectation of, being the engineer and, doing that work. And so because all this gooey stuff inside, I realized that's actually stuff that is tempered by life. So there was no point that I could really adopt someone else's trust in the universe, that, if I walk out and start, offering corporate mindfulness, that people are just going to take to this like fish to ducks to water. And I just had to build that trust in myself, and that trust that, and so only 15 episodes in, I was like, oh my God, the Inspired Evolution is basically telling me that if I'm going to be walk on the path of an Inspired Evolution, I'm going to actually have to do a lot more doing than just researching. And so then I had to quit my job so that I could actually feel that rub and actually go, oh, this is what having trust and actually, courage was such a massive thing. And I think this is useful for those that really are considering quitting anything. The biggest thing when I was leaving my job that 1 year, early on in that year, I always, for some reason, thought that courage was the same as fearlessness. Maybe I watched too many Braveheart movies. It is one of my favorite movies, so I don't know. But I thought courage was exactly the same as fearlessness. And I remember I was eating in a acai bowl, and I was sitting outside the National Museum here in Victoria. And I'm sort of just eating the acai bowl. And I just Googled courage. I don't know what was going on. I have these moments. As you can tell, I'm pretty quirky. So I'm sitting there and I Google courage. And what comes up is, and I've kind of just stopped. And I was like, oh, when you have these clear moments of and this was a Satori moment. So I was learning through bliss in this moment. Because it basically, Google taught me that courage is actually not having fear. That's not what courage is at all. Courage is having fear and taking action despite that fear anyway. And that was huge, such a small thing, but massive, because I was like, oh my God, I respect strength and courage as a man in other men all the time. But when I see courage, I used to think they were just fearless people. But the reality is, no, they definitely had fear. They just had the courage to go, okay, that's my shadow. That's the area that I really need to work on, because that's where my fears are. How well can I build a relationship with that? Let me lean into it a little bit and see how much of it can really temper me and help me grow. And so that, realizing that, I had this fear around security, not having a consistent paycheck is what kept me in a job for 7 years, And I think, when it boils down to it, I think a lot of us are in that situation. And just realizing that that was my fear. How am I going to make a living? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to end up homeless? Like, that sounds ridiculous, but that's really like, I thought if I left my job, it was one of the best opportunities anyone could ever have. I'm working for a multinational corporation as an engineer. You know, this is the best job a graduate could have had, and I've been thriving and like doing really well. What happens if I walk out on all of this? Everybody keeps telling me it's the most amazing opportunity. The caveat to all of that is when you do walk out and you do quit, you realize that those are all stories. And this is what you were sharing about the social expectations before as well, because on the other side, your problem actually becomes choosing the opportunities, because there's so many.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. Everybody should just stop and ruminate on that for a second. Yes, the post-quit opportunities, because it's an opportunity cost for you to stay in whatever isn't working. You can't do 14 different things with your life. There's a finite amount of time and energy you have. And when you're spending it all in one place, the universe is like, all right, I had this opportunity over here, but he's busy, so we'll keep moving on.
Absolutely. And it's a very real thing, you know, it's very difficult to quantify opportunity cost. It's very, very difficult. And for the most part, until you displace yourself from your current zone of comfort to experience what it could be somewhere else, you just don't know. You know, this comes back to that gooey stuff. Like, your head can sort of be like, oh, I'm missing out on this and I'm missing out on that. But you don't know until you put yourself in that alternative environment and space.
Ooh, that's so valuable. I love that you were like, okay, I need to actually experience what these people are experiencing. And then you went through it yourself. That is super powerful. That's courageous. But I'm sure even Google would call that courageous. I love this
Touch
visual
wood.
of you in the acai bowl in front of the museum. Dear Google, what is courage?
Yeah, and like even now, and like I tell, like I think back to that story, and it's like, man, what was I googling? I still can't for the life of me remember why I googled courage, and I was like, thank you, you know, like whatever divine inspiration hit at that moment.
Exactly. And that's, like you said, you just have to live through these things. It's hard to wake up one day and just say, I'm going to trust the universe. What you do is you live through and you take note of things like that happening, like the fact that you were somehow divinely guided to Google that word, or that out of nowhere you decided, some reason drinking seems like a really bad idea now. And it wasn't from like a logical place, because you weren't having a problem with alcohol, but just something shifted in your head. And so it's when you kind of look back and think, oh, there are so many times the universe has had my back. Granted, you can also go back, if you choose to, look at all the times that bad things have happened, but that's not going to get you forward. If you took, like, if you take an inventory, okay, most of the time, even when bad things happen, well, quote unquote bad things happen, how can you not prove that something worse wasn't going to happen? Or that, like, if you take a really good look, oh, I see that when I was let go of this job, it did open up this other door. And so, yes, things that are temporarily painful, there may still have been a greater good. And so once you start realizing those patterns, it's a little bit easier to trust. And this may be the, you know, the engineer in you and the sciencey person in me, like, looking for proof. But but I think, like you said, once you live it, it becomes slightly easier to just trust and embody that trust.
Yeah, and as I shared before, you know, I totally resonate with what you're saying. And again, it's everything you do is a reflection on the patterns that you create in your life. You know, I'm a big into mindset and working with people around this. It's everything you do is cultivation. So, you know, if you can cultivate, like, take little bits of action and just take little bits of trust at a time, you will cultivate that. And for me, the biggest thing is, like, the more and more I trust, somehow the more and more, like, you know, the responsibility to trust comes on even more. And it's like, okay, you know, like, I don't really know how else to articulate this, but it's basically like, you know, the universe kind of goes, okay, are you comfortable trusting that much now? Okay, how about this much? And it's like, oh, damn it, I just was getting my feet planted. And I was like, okay, fair enough. You know, it's like the work is like ever continue in that space. But, you know, and maybe this is a defense mechanism, but this is, you know, like, I touch wood, you know, believe in higher power. And so for me, it's like, you know, the fact that we're here is an absolute miracle, you know, and like, just the amount of, like, what brought us here, like, even you and I having this conversation, but you in flesh, me in flesh, eyes, nose, taste, smell, all of this wrapped in together in this amazing divine monkey skin suit that we're in, you know, it's like such a blessing. And when I stop to actually just reflect on that for a moment, it's like, there is so much going on beyond what I really know, you know, like, and we're always focused on our goals and what we're going to make happen and this, that, and the other. And, you know, goals definitely do help you polarize to where you want to go, for sure. But again and again, I've come to realize that, you're always only ever looking at 5% of the pie, and 95% of it is, all the external forces of your life and what you were here to do anyway, pushing you and gravitating you towards where you were going. So that trust is always, something that is cultivated, but is always available to you. Like if you stop to think about the miracle that you are, it opens me up to greater and greater levels of trust again and again.
This is so beautiful. I could just listen to you talk forever. So much synchronicity with everything. Like one of my good friends, Josh Trent, was on, and he said in a way that I've never forgotten, he said the distance between my truth and where I am is the space of my suffering. And I think that's, what you started off saying today. And then we always talk, I always talk a lot about breath work, and then you're like, and then there's breath work. And I was like, we are some kindred spirits up in here. And I love, like you said, the fact that the universe brings anybody together at all in this 8 billion person world. And a beautiful soul like you with this great
Touch wood.
mindset would just run into each other on this A-Fest group.
Yeah.
These little things help me trust. So I appreciate you very much sharing your story and being open to come on the podcast. And can you tell everybody where they can find your show and find out more about you?
Oh, thank you so much. So to find out more about the Inspired Evolution, or the journey in any way, the Facebook page is www.facebook.com /inspired Evo. So evolution has been abbreviated to Evo. Same thing with Instagram, instagram.com /inspired Evo. Facebook's probably the best place to get in touch. If you shoot through a message, we're always there. You can find myself, Amrit Sandhu. There's a profile, there's a public page and my personal page. Hit me up. Like connection is one of my highest values. So hearing from people and connecting with people on the journey is definitely like a big reason why I, do the podcast and that sort of stuff. So I'd love to hear from you.
And the podcast is available on iTunes and all the places?
iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube. If there's a platform out there, it's available.
Nice. And that's Inspired Evolution Podcast.
Yeah, it's Inspired Evolution. So if you look it up, you'll find it. There will either be a mug of me or the brain. But yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I am so grateful for this opportunity, Lynn Marie. Thank you so much for holding the space and the work that you're doing. And, even in this conversation, I can really feel just the authenticity and your genuine heart to really help and support people on their journey through letting go of things that no longer serve them. So I think it's really beautiful what you're doing. And I feel really blessed to be able to share the time here with you today.
Oh, thank you so much, my friend. And for everybody else out there, until next time, happy quitting.